Noam, thanks so much for joining the Rick and Kelly show. I'm here without Kelly,
Okay.
but more importantly, you're here. And I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about what it's like running one of the most famous comedy clubs in America, the Comedy Cellar in New York City.
Thank you very much. Is that the question? What's it like?
Yeah, that's the question.
It's you know, in a certain way, it's an enormous amount of fun. Mostly because I get to spend my life around the most talented and interesting people. I hang out at the olive tree, I sit and shoot the shit with people like that, and the conversations around the table during the period when everybody was very uptight about what they were saying publicly or privately, even it was kind of an oasis because the comedians. Although on stage they might have been a little censoring themselves, behind the scenes it was as if it was still 1975. You could say whatever you want. So that was really a pleasure.
For people who haven't been to the Cellar,
Yeah.
a restaurant above it called the Olive Tree, right? And there's
Yes.
a bar up there, and there's a table in the corner that I guess is the comedian's table. That's
Yep.
reserved for the performers before and after their sets.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And so on any given night, there could be some very famous faces sitting in that corner table.
Oh yeah, I mean, quite often people like Chris Rock or Louis C.K. Or Jerry Seinfeld even they'll come down just to sit at the table, not even to perform.
Wow.
It's kind of it's a culturally important part of the comedian world. From time to time, when there's tragedy, someone dies, like Patrice O'Neill died, or Greg Giraldo. Just people from all over the country even would just come and naturally know that's where they need to go to commiserate the Comedy Cellar table. So it's
the last time I was there with Kelly, George Schultz was performing that night, and he was hanging out.
Andrew Schultz, yeah.
Andrew Schultz, yeah.
I wish George Schultz would perform, but Andrew Schultz, yeah.
But Andrew is incredibly talented. Really, like a lot of these guys you might not think are as affable or as fun or as interesting off the stage as they are in person.
No, Andrew Schultz, I want to single out as a real gem, both personally in the way he conducts himself. I see not just with me, but I see him quite often with fans, with friends of friends. I mean, he's just as we say, he's just a mensch. But he's also, and I don't know if Newsmax is covering this or how Newsmax generally feels about it, but there's kind of a cleavage developing on the right now between the people who are really going off on this kind of conspiratorial thinking and becoming very tolerant of certain attitudes about Jews and stuff like that. And this is happening within the comedy community as well. But for my money, he's quite grounded. And even though he's friends with all those guys, he does not seem to be just carried along with the tide on that stuff. And that takes a certain amount of character and integrity on his part. So I really like Andrew Schultz.
I would imagine there is pressure in that community, like there is in every community. Like either you go along with the flow, you do what we're doing, or you're an outsider.
I believe there's some peer pressure. Also, you're afraid they often become afraid of their fans. A few complaints on Twitter can have the appearance of being a groundswell. They get panicked. So Andrew doesn't seem to be fazed by that stuff.
Well, it's interesting because I'm good friends with a musician who was reluctant to do conservative media because he didn't want to come out or come across as this big Republican and then lose half of his fan base. And I wonder, does that apply to comedians as well?
I think it applies to comedians as well, but I think both in music and in comedy, I don't want to say it's not a real thing to worry about, but it's an exaggerated thing to worry about. I don't think people lose fans all that easily, unless they actually come out and say something really dumb or offensive. I think people, they'll go along for the ride if they really like you and like your art, as it were. But that's my opinion.
My impression certainly from the last few years, and maybe not since Donald Trump was reelected, my impression was that because of cancel culture, and because people got so sensitive about every little thing, that comedians were getting a lot more heat. They were getting booed or silenced, especially on, we talked about yesterday about college campuses where they get protesters, and they were, you told me, self-censoring because they knew they were going to get a lot of heat if they said certain things all of a sudden.
Well, I think that the self-censorship is obviously not just in comedy, but of intellectuals, of writers, of everywhere. This was the hugest reality, the biggest price that we paid for cancel culture. It wasn't the X number of people who actually were ruined. It was all the rest of us who just felt this oppressive atmosphere of don't say the wrong thing. I do a podcast, and it became routine. After I'm sure you've had this experience. After you shut the mics off, then the guests would start saying what they really think.
Yeah.
You know, or they say, "Can you take that out? I hope this doesn't get taken the wrong way." I mean, everybody was in this panic all the time, and this was the fingerprints of the left, and it couldn't be attached to any one politician. But if it could have been attached to any one politician, the way so many things are attached to Trump, that one politician would be viewed by history as one of the villains of the modern era. If one politician had been responsible for what we went through in terms of the self-censorship and the bending of what we really felt in order to, conform to politics or whatever it is, it was that guy would be a villain. That was a horrible time that we lived through, and I think we're on the other end of it.
It was the dark days of modern society. Well,
yeah, I mean, you had doctors saying that it's okay to go out and test as long as it's racist. Like that doesn't defy our COVID rules because racism is a public health issue too. Now, I can't believe doctors really believed that. They felt pressure to say it. Most of them. That's my opinion.
Yeah. But it carried through a couple of administrations, it seemed like to me. I don't know what the cultural shift was that drove that wokeism and that you can't offend anyone. It seemed like it carried beyond just one or two presidents. But now it does seem like it's over, and it does seem like Donald Trump is the guy who's making it end, because he's saying we're not putting up with this nonsense anymore. We're not going to do this crap anymore. We're not going to play to these super minorities anymore who have these, opinions that everyone's supposed to, like the trans community, for example. Like we're all just supposed to accept that men can play women's sports, and Donald Trump was like, no, we're not doing that. It's stupid, and we're not going to do it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, well, two things. First of all, how it came about. It really bubbled up and then increased in velocity. There was a book written about it by John Haidt, The Coddling of the American Mind, that was describing how it started with colleges and stuff like that. It's an interesting, anthropological thing to learn about how it happened. And I do agree with you about Trump. And I'm, just in case people are wondering, I'm not all pleased with everything that Trump has been doing in his first 110 days, whatever it is. But I've come to think about it this way, and maybe you have kids too. Every administration at some point gets reduced to 4 or 5 bullet points in a middle school student's textbook, right? That they have to learn, right? Uh-huh. And all the noise really disappears. There's a lot of noise around Trump now, which I'm bothered by. But one of the bullet points, when all the dust settles, will probably be this cultural shift away from wokeness and cancel culture. And that is an important and good accomplishment, and people should be able to recognize that even if they can't stand Donald Trump. This was a very, very crucial change in America. Many, many good things are going to come out of the fact that people feel free now to say what they think.
Well, I hope it continues. I don't know if that pendulum can swing back the other way. I don't think so. No?
I don't think, my gut, I mean, I wouldn't, my gut is that no, it's not going to swing back the other way so easily, mostly because I believe that many, many, many more people were against it all along, but were just afraid to speak out. Mm-hmm. It's not as if the pendulum really was there. It's that there was an emperor's new clothes thing going on. We were made to believe the pendulum was there because of a small number of elite journalists and people on Twitter and loudmouth people of all stripes. They intimidated us, you know?
Yeah. Well, I have to bring my wife up here because she was canceled. She was a victim of cancel culture.
Hmm.
And she's controversial. She speaks her mind, but a lot of the things that she was upset about happened during the pandemic. And she was proven right, about masks and social distancing and closing schools and closing businesses and the ill effects that had on society. But at the time, it wasn't okay to go against the government line of we all have to do this. We all have to get that jab. We all have to, stay 6 feet apart. We all had to play the game, and anybody who objected to it was vilified. And she was one of those people.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to the details, each of those slices of COVID, I might not agree with you on some of them. I think some of them are exaggerated. I think masks are, N95. There's a lot there, but on the overall, on the overall issue of that people were vilified and again intimidated to keep quiet. This is absolutely true. I mean, take one we all agree on now. People were afraid to say, I think it's most likely that the virus escaped from the Wuhan lab. I think it was a lab leak.
Right.
I remember Jon Stewart famously criticized Stephen Colbert about it, and people were like, "Oh my God, what's gotten into Jon Stewart? Has he gone off the deep end?"
Yeah.
But it was obviously, most likely a lab leak.
Right.
People calling it racist. This was insane. That was insane. Yeah.
But I guess, to your point, it was a stifling of free speech, free expression, and free and opinions.
Yeah.
And if you went against the norm, you were punished for it.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if at that comedian's table, if part of the conversations were about, well, can we say this? Would they run jokes past each other? Like, do you think I'll get in trouble if I say that?
Absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
did.
Yeah. And especially the white males were the ones mostly worried. There obviously was much more latitude for people who were, kind of considered part of the intersectional community.
You had to close, right, during COVID? Did you have to shut your clubs?
We had to close we closed actually 10 days earlier than we had to because I saw the writing on the wall. And this gets back to what I was saying before, much of what we know about COVID now, we didn't know then.
Yeah.
So we were extremely cautious because we were planning for the worst. We didn't know what we were up against. So we closed early. I did not attempt to do any of these kind of online things or anything many clubs did. And then we opened the day that we were allowed to, and we were sold out on the day we were allowed to open again, and everything went back to normal immediately.
But in the meantime, how were these comedians making a living? What were they doing?
Well, a lot of them, some of them are rich, right? They did all right. And some of them were very poor.
Yeah.
And they did all right because they had various things available to them.
But
there was this kind
government?
Yeah. But there was this kind of middle of the road act comedian who really, really struggled. They didn't have PPP loans, and they were kind of like fell through the cracks of a lot of support. So they were trying online things, or they would fly around to the various redder states, which were not locking down so much, and they'd perform there. And they really had a hard time of it.
Now, do you monitor the acts? Are you down there most nights watching the comedy?
No, but I'm not down there most nights watching the comedy, but I've watched plenty of comedy. If you're asking, like, do I care what they say? No, I don't ever care what they say. What I do care about is whether the audience likes them.
Right. And how do you monitor that?
Well, it's like my father used to say, you don't even need to speak the language to know who the funny comedians are. You could walk into a comedy club in China and you could say to yourself, oh, this guy must be funny, right? Like you could just tell when people are enjoying somebody when they're not.
Right.
And that's without regard to whether they're offensive or not. So if an act doesn't do well too often, then we have to, take measures. But if a comedian says something offensive, I almost never, and I say almost never, I mean like once every 5 years, I might say, listen, dude, you keep selling this joke and we keep getting complaints about it. Like, stop digging, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's very, very, very rare because comedians, they're very savvy. They want to go over. They don't want to offend people. So they'll take the temperature of the room and sometimes they'll do it this way. They have an idea. It's a Holocaust joke that ends with a rape. Okay, there's got to be a way to make this work, right? So try it this way and that way and this way. And either they will find a magical solution, a little bit trial and error, or they'll abandon their thing, on their own. They don't need me telling them what to do.
Now, you mentioned your father. Was he the originator of the club? How did you become to be the owner of this cellar?
The guy who originated the club is a guy named Bill Grunfest, I'm still involved with him in some way. And he was just this young comic who came in off the street, said to my father, "Hey, Manny, I see you're not doing much downstairs. How about I bring some comedians here? You take the drinks, I take the door," that kind of thing. And they really hit it off. They were like meant for each other.
But wait, what was downstairs before that? Was it always some kind of a supper club or something, or?
It had been a Middle Eastern nightclub that my father played in, and then that became so successful, he moved it next door to where the cafe was now. And then it was just like treading water. There was like a Brazilian woman with a guitar who would sing, and just like trying to. Yeah, it was like just like a back room that was sometimes active.
Like the 70s, 60s in New York City?
No, this is early 81, I think.
Oh, 81. All right.
Yeah, we're more recent than some of the others. So, okay. And it wasn't like an overnight sensation. I mean, as recently as the 1996, 1997, the weeknights were dead. The waitresses used to have to take off their aprons and sit in the audience, pretending to be audience, so that if somebody walked in off the street, they wouldn't feel like they were the only ones there. So they would come in and sit down. So, and then it began to tick up and tick up and tick up, and now I think say we're still on an upward slope.
Well, for people who haven't been there, I mean, you're in the East Village, West Village,
yeah,
on a really cool little street,
mm-hmm.
right by Washington Square Park, mm-hmm. right, and sort of NYU campus.
Yep.
And there will be lines out the door and around the corner and down the block.
Yeah,
I've seen them almost every night that I've been there.
Oh, it's every night. We have 4 stages now. We do like 75, 80 shows a week. And except for periods of really bad weather, like really cold, we can sell out 75, 80 shows a week on 4 stages now.
If someone thinks they're funny,
yeah,
and they want to do a set,
yeah,
how do they go about getting a spot on your stage?
They would, I watch everything or have someone watch everything that's sent to me, just even to my personal email address. Like somebody says, I'm a comedian, here's a clip of me. I don't presume that if I haven't heard of somebody or they're just like a secretary that they can't be funny. So I try to cast a wide net. So, essentially any way they can get the message to us, hey, watch this, we will watch it.
Yeah. What if I just said, hey, Noam, I'm funny?
No, you can't put you on without having. I mean, if you had some comedians that we trusted say you got to check out Leventhal, he's got a tight 5 minutes, then we might do it without seeing your clip. But man off the street, no.
So you mentioned a couple of big names that people recognize, and I want to ask you. Don't let me forget about Louis C.K. in a minute. But
sure.
On my Newsmax show, you told a story about Steve Martin. Now, you meet a lot of very famous comedians, but Steve Martin, for whatever reason, and you'll tell me, really was a special moment for you when he came into the club.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was in high school when Steve Martin was doing the wild and crazy guy thing, when he was maybe the biggest star in the country for a while, played Madison Square Garden. He was a breath of fresh air stylistically. The Jerk came out. This was just, I think every generation has their figures which just are special to them. And for a guy my age to see Steve Martin, it was like seeing Paul McCartney or something like this. It was just thrilling. And he'd never been to the club before. And there he was, Steve Martin. He came in with Martin Short. And when I told him that this is the most thrilling night in Comedy Cellar history to me, I have to say his reaction seemed very sincere. It was a very warm thank you. And, despite the fact that this guy must be told 100 times a day, what a hero he is to people, he still seemed to be sincere. So that pleased me as well. He could have been like slick and aloof, and that would have turned me off. But no, it was terrific. He is a special talent. I mean, as a writer, as a performer, as an actor, as a musician, this is a rare, as they say, national treasure. He's very unusual.
He's got to be what, in his 70s now?
Yeah, I think he's almost 80. Yeah, I could tell you. Yeah.
And Martin Short, had you met him before?
I had never met him before, and you know that would have been thrilling enough. Steve Martin is 79 years old. Martin Short was a big deal as well, you know. But he was overshadowed by Steve Martin, in my eyes. But Martin Short, that was awesome also.
And Steve Martin was there to just try out some material before he did Saturday Night Live, right?
Yeah, he and Martin Short came together with John Mulaney, and they ran through the opening monologue to that Saturday Night Live anniversary show.
That is so cool. Now, do you record every act in the cellar?
We record every act in the cellar, yeah.
And what do you do with those recordings?
Nothing. We're not allowed to do anything with them because I don't own the performances. I just own the recording, right? So what do we do with them? We give them to comedians who want to use them for clips. From time to time, when somebody does a documentary like about Chris Rock or something, we'll get a call from Chris's organization. Can you pull together 25 clips of us, clips of me since the early 80s or whatever it is?
And so you have like a tape librarian. You have someone who's cataloging everything.
Dude, in the last year, I spent like $25,000 getting some of these VHS tapes digitized.
Yeah,
because they're degrading. So we have every technology. We have VHS tapes and then DVDs. DV tapes and DVDs, and now we're on to just hard drives.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have to catalog it. I'm hoping AI is now available. They can actually identify each comedian and help me catalog it.
But I would imagine that you could do like a Netflix series or something. With the amount of material you have.
Yeah, we have actually had some interest in people like doing documentary, and they're very interested in the archive footage. And I'm always like, yes, but you have to get it, approved by the various performers. I can't show any of it. Although other clubs do. Not maybe they wouldn't have the nerve to put it on Netflix, but I see other clubs will just show performances of comedians who perform there without permission, which I think is very bold and vulgar. I would never.
Yeah. Well, you're a good man, and you're looking out for those guys, and that's awesome.
Yes.
Is there someone who you thought would be really, really good who sucked?
What do you mean by that? I thought would be really good.
Who's known as being really funny, and then they hit your stage and they just bomb.
Well, okay. This I should say. I mean, I'll say this that Chevy Chase, who is a comedic giant, but
Yeah.
I guess he was never a stand-up comic.
Right.
So when he came on and went on stage, he did not. I would say he bombed. I think he would say he bombed. This is not to say that Chevy Chase is not a huge talent, but that was disappointing to see. But no, normally when it's not easy to make it in comedy, and it's a pretty meritocratic rise. Especially in comedy, even more than music, because not a lot of hype. I mean, either you're funny or you're not, and you climb the ladder. So when they're famous, they're usually pretty proficient. They're usually pretty good.
Yeah.
Like when Robin Williams used to come down, you could say, "Oh my God, this guy actually is a genius." I mean, you'd see it before your eyes.
Robin Williams I would have loved to have seen him perform comedy. That guy was ridiculously on fire all the time, from what I know. But you knew him personally?
I knew him, like he would recognize me if I saw him in an airport. He'd say, "Hey, Noam, how you doing?" I didn't know him, like wasn't a friend of his, but I spent a number of hours sitting at the table with him, mostly listening to him hold court. Yeah. Again, very, very nice, very warm. Not all of them are like this, but there's certain people you notice how how they'll talk to the waitresses, how they'll talk to somebody who's a civilian who chimes in with an opinion about something. Another interesting thing is some comedians, if like just like a friend of mine were sitting at the table who said something funny,
Yeah.
some comedians will laugh warmly because it was funny, and other comedians will get tight as if they don't want to laugh at something that a civilian said, as if a civilian says something funny, that kind of undermines the notion that they have a special talent. You know what I mean? It's like weird kind of things that go on. But Robin Williams was on the good side of all these things. He was warm, he was gracious, he would laugh freely at anybody's joke, professional or not.
And then steal them for his own act.
Well, yes, that was something that he would do too. Apparently,
There's a lot of that going on. So I understand it.
not a lot, but like a lot of things, when it happens, it gets so much attention. You know, you would think it's a lot. Like every time somebody's kidnapped somewhere in Iowa, my wife locks up my daughter because she thinks everybody's getting kidnapped. Right? I'm like, no, it's one person out of 300 million. But when it happens, it's significant. Yeah.
You mentioned Chevy Chase. I've heard he's a real dick.
That I don't know. I didn't interact with him. People do say that. I didn't have any.
Say though, right?
No, I wouldn't say, but I would use Morse code with my eyelashes. But no, I didn't interact with him.
Louis C.K. You defended him on my show in part because, well, on your own podcast, I heard you defending him because you said that, for example, Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, did far worse things beyond impregnating the nanny or babysitter or whoever that person was.
Yeah.
Worse things than Louis C.K. did, but Louis C.K. went through a really hard time, didn't he?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Doug Emhoff, and it wasn't really ever disputed. He hit a woman. He spun her around, And
I think that was in Monaco or something, right? Before he met Kamala.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was a girlfriend. I think it was a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And the same people who were just, outraged and thought that Louis C.K. should never ever work again, they just looked the other way about an assault. And of course, this was the same thing they did with Bill Clinton, and they give Mike Tyson a standing ovation. And I don't mean to. I'm not trying to trash Bill Clinton or Mike Tyson. I'm just pointing out that it's a very ad hoc process that awakened the mob. And when the mob wanted this guy in the public square in the rack, that's what they did. And they didn't feel any compunction about being inconsistent or any pressure even to explain some consistency. And this is why things like that, punishment, should be handled through due process and institutions and trials that bring evidence and can put people under oath and punish perjury. And that's why cancel culture is bad.
In his case, I guess he was accused of something. It was almost a he said, she said situation, as I recall.
Louis?
Yeah.
Well, he admitted to, he admitted to asking women, can I do this in front of you? It's not like it was a great thing that he did, or he even said that it was a great thing. He apologized for doing it.
Yeah.
But a lot of things got laid on to that, which was that a lot of the things that went around weren't true. Like there was one claim that he blocked the door and wouldn't let people leave and physically coerce them. That was not true. Even a New York Times reporter. I mean, I could go on and on. But when the Gawker story first came out about Louis, it had said that he blocked the door and wouldn't let these women leave. So that sounded bad. I mean, that's getting into like Emhoff territory. So when I interviewed the woman from the Times, Melina Rizek, I said, did you ask these women, Dana and Julia, did you ask Louis block the door? She says, I did ask them. I said, did he block the door? She's like, no, he didn't block the door. I said, well, why didn't you write that in your article? She says, I didn't think it was relevant.
Oh my God.
I said, well, you would have thought it was relevant if he did do it. Like, this is out there and everybody thinks this is true. All of which is to say, people were reacting not only to what he did, but what they thought he had done, which was even worse.
Yeah.
And it was just, ridiculous.
I think that's awesome that you interviewed the reporter and asked her that question, by the way.
But by the way, it's awesome. It's also a credit to her.
That she answered honestly?
Yes, and that she came on the show. She knew I was a hostile interviewer.
But she still didn't put it in the article, and that is what I talked about that quite a bit on my Newsmax show over the last year, is how the journalists shape the message, and they've been, for example, protecting Biden during his presidency and not talking about the obvious things like tripping and falling and what does that signify, and losing his train of thought and not doing interviews, and like they didn't expose that or expose his failings or his, questionable ability, cognitive ability. And by not doing it, they perpetuated a myth. They weren't doing their job.
It was a disgrace. And, I think it was Mark Halpern who compared it to, like he said, like, we wonder, how was it that the reporters all covered for Franklin Roosevelt when he was in a wheelchair?
Yeah.
Or how was it that the reporters all covered for John F. Kennedy when he was banging broads and taking pain medication? Well, and we thought we were past that era.
Yeah.
And we weren't. And this was, and we still don't know all the details, but this could have been 3 times as bad as any of those older incidents. I mean, yeah, the president can be out of it a little bit if he's just running day-to-day business, because it's kind of automatic. It's like you know what a Democratic president is going to do. But if the shit hits the fan and you have a Cuban Missile Crisis or any number of these things, which 9/11, whatever it is, you need the president to be sharp. You're taking big chances with the world here by covering for this guy.
Yeah. And it's worse in my mind because information is so easily accessible these days. There's no excuse for not having the ability to spread the message or share the message or the truth, because there are so many platforms and there's so much more access to information. And then you have the press secretary coming out and trying to tell the world that the videos you're seeing are deep fake, whatever that means. And we can all see with our own eyes what the White House pool cameraman shot. That's not fake.
No, they called it cheap fake, deep cheap fake. Yeah. No, not only that, and they would, I mean, you literally saw Barack Obama taking this old man by the hand and leading him off stage. I mean, that body language to any human being communicates something very, very clear, that there's a certain feebleness about the man. Yes. You don't take the president of the United States by the hand and lead him off stage, lightly, right? Even if you're a former president. Right. And then they would say it was a cheap fake, and then they would pivot and they try to tell us that Trump was the one who was losing his mind. Trump was the one who was senile because he, as opposed to Biden, who's speaking 15 minutes a day, Trump would be speaking 15 hours a day, right. And he would slip up in some dumb way. And I mean, I could go on, but I'd say just one thing about Trump. We knew Trump was not senile, and the reason we knew is because all the tell-all books that came out of the administration by Barr and Bolton and any number of them who grew to hate the man, right? Like they not one of them ever said he was losing his mind. Yeah. They said 10 other things that they hated about this guy. They said he should never be president again. Don't ever give him the keys. But not a single one of them ever wrote one sentence about his cognitive abilities. He's fine, right? And now that he won, we see that he's fine. Even if you hate him, he's fine, right?
That's a really good point. He is the most transparent of any modern president. He speaks more than any of them have. He is so open and so willing. He invites the cameras into the Oval Office almost every day. When did you see Biden do that? And if they did it, he wouldn't answer questions. Not like Trump answers questions for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch Trump on the Rogan show, the Rogan interview he did, I would recommend it to anybody who didn't see it. Yeah. He knew. Like, he didn't know what Rogan was going to ask him about. First of all, just the fact that he goes on an interview, he doesn't know what he's going to be asked about, and he's not worried about it. Yep. That tells you something, right? Yeah. And then Rogan would ask him something about, I can't remember, like some obscure issue here or some obscure issue there. And I noted that Trump actually could recall a few details and a few, like, bullet points about anything Rogan threw at him, which was more than I expected. Like, I was impressed by his general knowledge of things,
But even more so when you look at his opponent in the last election, Kamala Harris, who couldn't do that on any topic. I mean, it was embarrassing.
Yeah. Now, and people are going to interpret this as like an endorsement of his policies. I mean, just repeat, I'm upset with him about some of the stuff that he's doing. I really am.
Okay.
But that's not going to bleed over into me now deciding that the man has cognitive decline, or that Harris wasn't, basically a very mediocre intellect. I mean, these are obvious things,
Being the owner of the club.
Yeah.
Were you concerned that people might know that you maybe leaned a little more conservative during those Biden years when everyone was coming down against conservatives?
I was concerned about it, but not overly so. Well, after the Louis thing passed, and that was traumatic. We had protesters. I had threats against the club. I had employees that were spit on. I had somebody tweet at me, Facebook message me about kind of threateningly about my kids. It was a lot. There were horrible articles written about me, horrible things said about me in public. After I was forged in that fire, I learned not to be so timid about other things. So, like, if that wasn't enough to upend me, the fact that somebody gets a hint that I'm a little bit right of center on certain issues, whatever. I think a lot of people are kind of right of center on certain issues and don't talk about it. I mean, why did Trump win the popular vote?
Yeah. That's why you can't believe the polls, because people were scared to admit, but when they got into a voting booth, they voted with their heart and their true beliefs.
Yeah, I guess that's what happened. I don't remember how the polls were, but we knew it was neck and neck, But the popular vote, that was really a surprise.
Well, it was less neck and neck than people thought, and in part because the media was spinning Harris as the clear leader when she wasn't, trying to prop her up while they tore Trump down. And that's the other thing that bothers me, is that 97% of every article written is negative about Trump.
Yes.
And it has been for a long time. But this isn't about Trump. This is about you, Noam. And this is about your awesome club. I do have one very random question. My daughter Shoshana worked for you, and she told me, because she was working 2 jobs and she was kind of burning out on it because they can be late nights. She said that you only hire full-time help. Only the waiters are only full-time.
Mm-hmm.
Timers, you can't cut back to 2 nights a week. Why is that?
Well, when you have too many part-time employees, what happens is that when you have a special event or more than one person calls out sick on the same day, you don't have any bench available to you. You're not able to can't call Shoshana, who works Wednesdays and Fridays, and get her to work Thursdays in a pinch.
Yeah.
So it is not helpful to the organization to have part-time employees. And it's not that we've never, ever made exceptions. Like, if I had someone who worked with me for 10 years who then wanted to go back to school, of course, I try to make exceptions. But there's another issue now, which is interesting. It might be interesting to your listeners, which is that the labor laws now in New York are very aggressive. So, like for instance, during COVID, I had a guy who worked for me for like 20 years, who had a family, who was struggling to make ends meet during COVID. So I wanted to give him some money. And I was warned very sternly by my lawyer and accountant, you can't do that, because if you give him money, every employee who works for you will then be able to claim that you're discriminating against them if they ask you for money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but he's working for 20 years. He's got 3 kids and a family. This other person just started a week before COVID started, and they have a rich family. Like, what? And so it's a similar thing with these. Like, we used to have the latitude to say, listen, well, this employee is in a different category. I'm going to let them work part time. Now you run the risk, if you make any exception for any policy, that some other employee can now bring an action against you for discrimination.
Yeah.
So it's just another reason to not want to risk these kind of things. But even prior to that, it's just for the agility of the organization, having part-time employees is not good.
Okay.
Long answer, huh?
Yeah, no, that was I'm really interested in the minutia like that. But I don't want to keep, because I know you're a busy guy. Just final question. Do you love going to work every day? Do you love what you're doing? And how long can you see yourself running the Cellar and other clubs?
Yes, I think that And now you almost fit what I'm about to say, or maybe you do. Being your own boss. If there's any advice you can give anybody in life, what should you do with your life? If you can be your own boss and not have to answer to anybody and say, "Hey, Dworman, where were you?" Or even should you make a mistake, only have to answer to yourself. This is a tremendous pleasure in life, in any type of job, especially in a comedy business, especially in a successful comedy business where I don't have the day-to-day financial anxiety now that I did for most of my career, and my father always did. So I'm in a very, very wonderful time. I have time with my family and my children. So yes, I knock on wood. I'm could not imagine being more fortunate in life than I feel right now.
Well, congratulations.
Thank
You
you.
for taking the time to talk to me and share your stories. Find you fascinating, and I'm sure our audience will as well.
All right, Rick. And next time when you come into the Olive Tree, I'll tell you the real story. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna hang up. Okay.
I want 5 minutes on stage. I'm gonna send
All
you.
right. You got it. You
I'm
got
gonna
it.
send you a reel.